Good morning, students. Today, before we look at our morning message, I want us to talk about nursery rhymes. If you'll remember, back in December, January, we were learning about traditional tales, folk tales, fairy tales, but we also learned about a very short kind of little tale or story called a nursery rhyme. It's called a nursery rhyme because people learn it when they're little, when they're children in the nursery. Remember, a nursery is a place where small children or small plants are growing and being taken care of, and it's called a nursery rhyme because it usually rhymes. And we enjoy learning nursery rhymes because they sometimes tell about funny stories, they have rhymes, and they kind of sound neat. That's why they're fun to say and fun to sing, because they have a lovely sound, and it helps you learn to enjoy the sound of language. Sometimes we also learn some things about the past when we read nursery rhymes, because it teaches us some things about how people lived, what kind of jobs there were, what life was like in the past. That sometimes comes through in nursery rhymes too. Like in Jack and Jill that we learned last week, or we relearned, because a lot of you maybe already know some of these rhymes. We had that thing where we learned that they did bandaging with vinegar and brown paper, right? And of course now we have modern medicine to take care of our bumps and bruises. Anyway, so yesterday you learned this one. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them some broth without any bread, then kissed them all quickly and sent them to bed. So there's rhyming in there, like bread and bed, shoe and do. So I think your parents probably talked to you about some of the rhyming. And I thought that I would also show you the nice picture from the Tomie dePaola Mother Goose. We're going to go back to learning more about Tomie dePaola in a couple days. And here's the picture of the old woman who lived in a shoe. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our morning message. April 21st, 2020. Dear students, this week we will review and learn more facts about Martin Luther King Jr. Oh, I have to stop and think for a minute. I'm remembering we learned a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. back in January. His birthday was on January 15th, and this year we celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day on January 20th. That was a Monday, so we're going to learn more about him this week. Let's reread that first sentence. This week we will review and learn more facts about Martin Luther King Jr. Ooh, there's a re word. What facts, down here, what facts can you remember, Mrs. Kilmer? What facts can you remember? So remember, this is where we're waking our brains up, because our brains will learn more if we're already thinking about the things that we already know, if we're already making connections to what we already know about Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm counting on my hands. I want you to go ahead and tell someone nearby what you can remember about Martin Luther King Jr. And then we're going to enjoy a totally new book about him. In fact, I'm really quite excited that in the APS calendar we're learning more about him this week, because I had some books that I didn't have time to read to you in January, and now I can read them to you. I'll be right back with that book. Hope you thought of some facts that you were able to remember about Martin Luther King Jr. And we're going to read this little golden book about Martin Luther King Jr. by Bonnie Bader, illustrated by Sue Cornelison. I'm going to scoot a little closer. And on the back, the blurb isn't about the book, it's explaining about little golden books and how there are lots of different kinds of little golden books that you can get. It's kind of like a series, but it's not really like a series, because they're not all biographies or not all connected to Martin Luther King Jr. My Little Golden Book about Martin Luther King Jr. by Bonnie Bader, illustrated by Sue Cornelison, a golden book, New York. Here on the title page, I see Martin Luther King with a microphone and his hands are moving, he's talking. That's reminding me of a fact. I remember that he was known to be a really good speaker, a very strong speaker. Martin Luther King Jr. led the movement calling for equal rights for all Americans. His boyhood home was filled with love. Martin had an older sister he called Chris and an older brother named Alfred Daniel. Their mother, Alberta, spoke softly and was kind. It was very easy for Martin to talk to her. Martin's father, Martin Sr., was a large man with a booming voice. He was a minister of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. So remember, a minister is a leader of a church. And Martin Luther King's dad was a minister. The church was filled with song. Martin loved music and sang in the church choir. He enjoyed Sunday school and had many friends there. Martin got along with everyone, the children, the parents, and the teachers. But sometimes Martin's life was sad. Martin had a good friend he played with almost every day. Then, when they turned 6, Martin went to a school for black children, and his friend went to a school for white children. One day, the boy's father told him he could no longer play with Martin because he was black. Heartbroken, Martin ran home and cried to his mother. Oh, I do remember that story. Remember, heartbroken? That's like a compound word. It's like your heart is broken. Heartbroken, super, super sad. That night at dinner, Martin's parents told him it was his duty as a Christian to love everyone, even when he was angry at them. Martin's mother also said he should always feel a sense of somebodyness, that he was important, even though the outside world was telling him he was not, simply because of his skin color. So there they are sitting around the table. In those days, in the southern United States, that means the south part of the United States, black people could only drink from water fountains labeled colored, and they were not even allowed to go into many restaurants and stores. This was called segregation. Oh, I'm remembering that word. That's a word we learned back in January. Segregation, the separation of blacks from whites. As he grew up, Martin's heart began to grow heavier and sadder. He tried to remember his mother's words, that he was somebody, that he was important, but it wasn't easy. And in the picture, I can see, maybe that's supposed to be Martin peeking in the window of a little restaurant or a diner, and the sign says, "We serve whites only." One day, Martin's father took him shoe shopping. Even though the store was empty, the shopkeeper told them they had to go to the back of the store and wait to be served. Mr. King became angry. If he couldn't buy shoes for his son in the front of the store, he wouldn't buy them there at all. Taking hold of Martin's hand, he marched out. "I don't care how long I have to live with this system. I will never accept it," he said. Martin would grow up feeling the same way as his father. Martin was a very good student. He even skipped 2 grades. Before starting Morehouse College at the age of 15, he took a summer job in Connecticut. Things were different there for black people. In the North, black and white children went to the same schools. There were no separate water fountains. Everyone could shop in the same stores. Martin Luther King Jr. had a dream. He dreamed that these things could happen in the South too. Was there a way he could help people change the laws to make this dream come true? I got to stop and think for a sec. So here it's explaining how he went up north to have a job in the summer before he started college. And in the North, he noticed that things were different. Okay, so the North, different from the South. I'm kind of making a connection and remembering about when we studied about Abraham Lincoln too, about how ideas in the North and the South were really different. And then also this part where it mentions that he had a dream. I'm remembering something important about a dream, about Martin Luther King saying he had a dream. I'm going to have to keep remembering about that and see if it talks about that more. Martin decided to spend his life helping black people. He thought perhaps if he became a minister, he could reach people with his words. So he became an assistant minister at his father's church and went to seminary. Seminary is where you go to school, to college, to learn to be a minister. Later, Martin entered Boston University. There he met Coretta Scott, who was studying to be a singer. On their first date, they talked about how hard it was to be black in the United States. They talked about how people could live together in peace instead. After only 1 hour, Martin was sure he would marry Coretta one day, and he did. So there's where he meets his wife-to-be. After Martin and Coretta got married, a letter arrived from a church in Montgomery, Alabama. The church leaders invited Martin to give a sermon there. A sermon is the speech you give in church. If he did a good job, they would make him their minister. On a clear winter day, Martin drove from Boston to Montgomery. He knew his words had to come from his heart. He knew he could help people find strength to live out their faith, and Martin got the job. With his words, Martin told church members to go out and vote. Voting was one way to change unfair laws against black people. With his words, Martin helped organize protests. He told black people not to ride the buses in Alabama. Martin and others didn't think it was fair for black people to be forced to ride in the back. And with his silence, Martin and many others sat at whites-only lunch counters. So it's talking about how with his words, because he was a very good speaker, he convinced people to do things that would help the situation. And also with their silence, sometimes they sat in at places that wouldn't allow black people to protest those unfair laws. One summer day, thousands of people traveled to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Martin was the last to speak that day. "I have a dream," his voice boomed, "that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." I have a dream. So again, we talked about this in January. This isn't the kind of dream that you have when you're sleeping. This is a dream that's an important goal. It's something that you know is very worthwhile, and it's something that you're looking forward to in the future, that a change that will happen. And that's what he was talking about. A dream where his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, by what kind of people they are inside. Thousands of other people shared Martin's dream. Hand in hand, they walked through quiet valleys, over steep hills, and along busy highways, their hearts filled with hope for equality. Martin won important awards for his work. Sadly, he did not live to see all his dreams come true, but he did see the day when the laws were changed so that Americans of all colors were allowed to go to school together, sit together in restaurants, and shop at the same stores. Each day, people honor him when they visit his memorial statue in Washington, D.C. Martin Luther King Jr. will be forever remembered as a leader who fought for equal rights and freedom for all. In many places around the world, this fight continues, and Martin's words and dreams live on. And there on the last page, you can see a picture of the memorial And when I do something at the end of this book, I'm going back to look at this, and this reminds me about the field trip that we would have gone on, so it's a little bit of a sad remembering. The field trip we were going to go on to the monuments in Washington, D.C., and we would have gone to visit the Martin Luther King Memorial. But maybe that's something you could do with your parents later when it's okay to go out and about. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that information book about Martin Luther King Jr. I hope that your brain is waking up and starting to remember all the stuff we learned about him before. And I'll be reading a couple more books about Martin Luther King Jr. to you later this week. I'll see you later this afternoon with our fun storybook.